Radio Adelaide on digital, online at 101.5 FM.
Welcome to Soundtrack of Your Life on Saturday afternoon here at Radio Adelaide, 101.5 FM, digital radio and radioadelaide.org.au, of course. I'm David Heath. My pleasure to bring you the next hour of Radio Adelaide programming on a Saturday afternoon with Soundtrack of Your Life. A bit of a different show for Soundtrack of Your Life this afternoon. I'm going to talk to two friends of the program, two people that have featured on Soundtrack of Your Life over the last 12 months. They've had some interesting and positive developments in their lives and their careers, so I thought I'd catch up with Steve Davis and Victoria Purman. Steve is in the studio. We'll talk to Victoria a little bit later in the hour, but Steve here. Hello, Steve. How are you?
Very well, thank you, David. Might I just say Victoria has also been a guest on the Adelaide Show Podcast.
Look, it's Adelaide. We all sort of, there's not many degrees of separation, is there? We all, although I must say, I've never been on the Adelaide Podcast.
Oh, that's you and another person by the name of Peter Gers putting me under pressure. So, yes, I'll make amends.
How about Gersey and I on the same program?
Are you on good speaking terms with each other?
Absolutely. In fact, I was on Peter's program a few weeks ago on a Wednesday night promoting our Fringe show, our Creedence Fringe show. Peter very kindly had us on for 5 minutes. And, so I'm on very good terms with Peter.
I'll ponder and plot the best way forward then.
Welcome to Radio Adelaide again and Soundtrack of Your Life. Congratulations on the Easter Monday launch of your new brand, which of course is called Talked About Marketing. Why did you think it was time for a new brand, and how did you come about that name?
Well, time for the new brand. Look, there were some changes afoot in my professional life. The place where I'd been working for a long time, some things changed there that made me think it was time to start afresh. But in the background, about May last year, 2018, I did my first step into stand-up comedy.
Yes.
And I've long been the creative director and the writer and that sort of person. And this was just pushing me to new challenges. And I loved it. And so that has developed over the time. And more, whenever there was a chance when a client in my marketing world needed that creative stuff, I just felt so at home. And so, given the fact that it was time to leave the nest, I thought, let's do this. And the reason for Talked About Marketing is because in my heart of hearts, I love playing with words.
Yep.
I'm a writer. I love improvised theatre. And I love the challenge of not knowing what's next and having to say yes and come on with it. And so my hero all the way through, from my time when I was on radio or a journalist through till now, has been Oscar Wilde.
Yeah.
Because I've loved his wordplay, his wit. And so the quote I've basically lived my career by is, there's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about. And I just thought, you know what? I would love to have that little handle, Talked About Marketing, because flippantly someone could say, oh, I talked about marketing with Steve Davis, or they could say, we created some Talked About Marketing with Steve Davis.
Very nice. Nicely done.
There's a bit there. And look, Casey Cumming, who is an illustrator at large here in South Australia, she's done stylized images of the Balfour's frog cake. Hans at his last poster for the Fringe, she did the animation. She does the S Adelaide calendars.
Yep.
And I got talking with her because she came to see my Fat Cat show, and two and two went together, and we thought, you know what, if I'm going to be channeling Oscar Wilde, I'd love to be caricatured in his style. And she was exactly the right person to do this. So I've now got a caricature of myself, which she calls Steve Wilde.
Because the image is basically it's a stylized version with your facial features, but in that famous Oscar Wilde pose where he's sitting back in a chair and holding a cigarette or a cigar.
Yes.
Of course, you're holding a pen because of your work with words, but that's what the image for Talked About Marketing is, isn't it?
Yes, and she also gave another little flourish in his pocket of his suit. It's not a kerchief.
Oh, yes.
She's swapped it over for the top of a smartphone, and she's kept it fairly ambiguous as to whether it's an iPhone or an Android. So I can swing both ways on that technology front.
Of course. Tell me this, people sitting at home probably hear the words like public relations and marketing and communications all the time. What is marketing?
Marketing is where you are trying, hopefully, to create interest, desire and action in a marketplace for the goods or services that your client has to offer. Now, that sounds pretty straightforward on the surface. However, there's a lot of things demanding the attention of those people in the marketplace.
Yep.
And so the challenge of the marketer and the client is to make sure, is our product good enough? Is it available for sale in the right places? Is the pricing about right? And then what sort of promotion? How do we not only get someone's attention, but get their attention with something they care about?
Yep.
And so once you've worked out who's most likely to buy from you, the next challenge is, of all the things they might use to judge a product or service, which ones are the ones that really matter? Not just first cab off the rank if you ask them, but deep down, when they're looking at making a choice between two or three things, what is the criteria that counts the most? And that's the challenge. And then, of course, I love because I was basically talking about the 4 Ps of marketing, which have been well known for many, many years, of product, price, place and promotion. And I love the promotion end. You've got to do that other thinking first, but then it's coming up with that quirky way to grab attention in a way that gets talked about, which is what I'm hoping to achieve.
Let's play your first track. You picked a couple of songs for us, as is the format of this program. And when you launched your new brand on Easter Monday, we sat there and we also watched the 2002 movie, The Importance of Being Earnest. And this track is probably one of the highlights of the movie. It's a song called Lady Come Down.
After you, dear boy.
That is a great song. It's called Lady Come Down, written by a guy called Charlie Mole, from the soundtrack of The Importance of Being Earnest, of course, performed by Colin Firth and Rupert Everett, the stars of the 2002 movie. And the song is actually taken from a poem written by Oscar Wilde. And Steve Davis, you've picked that one, and for obvious reasons. It was the star track of the movie when you launched your new brand at Easter time.
Absolutely, and even though the quote I'm basing my new practice on was from the picture of Dorian Gray, I was thinking there were kids coming to this launch at the Mercury Cinema. The picture of Dorian Gray can be quite a gruesome and disturbing movie, when you have the scenes of confronting the portrait that's changing to be quite evil in the background. So I thought I'll go with his more popular piece, which, as it turned out, April 22 was 124 years to the day since The Importance of Being Earnest opened on Broadway.
Yep.
And I also had a picture of some of the critics of the day.
You did?
To make the point that we love Oscar now, thankfully in part, to people talking about what he did. H.G. Wells was one of the...
Yeah, I was about to say the critics included H.G. Wells and George Bernard Shaw.
Yeah, A.B. Walkley was there. But that symbiotic relationship was there. And the other reason I chose the Mercury is that's where I got married on December the 21st in 2002. Oh, the same year that the movie came out.
The same year that the movie came out, yes. There's just connections and themes going on everywhere.
Damn, I should have claimed that as being thought about, but I won't. Honesty is one of the key things I want to keep in my practice, so yeah.
Stand-up comedy. Did you wake up one morning and think, I want to have a crack at comedy, or was it building up for a while and you'd been thinking, you'd go to a comedy show and you'd think, I could do that, or was it just a sudden decision?
I woke up many mornings thinking I wanted to do comedy, and almost instantly my voice would say, don't be an idiot. You're not a joke teller. You might have the quips and whatever in an improv situation, but you're not a joke teller. And so I do MCing, I do workshops, and they're all I keep things moving and happy, but not with structured, planned jokes. And then when the School of Hard Knock Knocks podcast was about to feature an Adelaide stand-up comedian about a year ago, Murray, who runs it, tipped me off saying, you run the Adelaide Show Podcast, would you want to give this a little plug? And I said to him, why are you doing that? He said, we're about to run a course here in Adelaide, a stand-up course. Oh, I said, cheekily, why don't you put me through the course and I will cover it for the Adelaide Show podcast, thinking he'd say no, because it's, $500 or they're about $600. And he said yes. And I remember it right to this moment. I went silent, and then I said to him, you called my bluff. I can't back out now. I've got to do this. And I'm glad. I'm so glad, because Glenn Nicholas was the trainer for that particular course. And he actually, June 2 to 6, we're doing another one with him this year. But it was the most amazing connection. Glenn Nicholas, not only a funny man, very generous, caring man, and he just knows. He understands people and comedy and timing.
Now that you're doing it, now that you're doing stand-up comedian, are you finding yourself constantly looking around your world looking for material?
I have been, certainly doing a fringe show in the recent fringe from about October, November last year, and then December was the writing period. I was under a lot of pressure. You might say I've coasted since then, because I've done a few gigs where I've basically taken bits from my fringe show and reheated them, which I never wanted to do as a comic. But I've seen so many comedians and they do the same stuff over again and everyone laughs. And part of the challenge of stand-up is being able to do that, so that's good. But right now I've got May the 7th, a Cranker comedy coming up, Tuesday night. I'm pushing myself to come up with a new 5-minute set. And yesterday I was talking to a dad of one of our daughter's school friends who was telling me his story of going to the Anzac service yesterday. And in my mind, I'm thinking, Thursday, I should say, there's some material here that I could be using. If we're going to pick a taboo, why not pick Anzac
Day? Yes.
But it's not an irreverent take. It's more reflecting his experience and some of his surprising criticisms of his experience that I want to shine the light on, because it's unexpected. So, yes, the short answer is yes. The antenna's back, and I'm looking for that. And I've actually...
there is a bag for... This is radio, so I'll need to describe this. I'll need to go back to my old sports broadcasting days. There's a bag on a seat next to Steve with some material in it. In fact, he's pulled out a notebook.
Yep.
And you've been making notes about this Anzac Day material.
Exactly, because this guy's English.
We're going to have to buy you one of those little digital tape recorders rather than having to carry around a notebook.
Well, there is an advantage for this notebook. Unlike a digital recorder, this won't end my marriage. Because a lot of my ideas happen at 2 a.m, and hearing me dictate is not as bad as hearing a little bit of pen scratch in the dark. But yeah, this is what I keep with me all the time now. Just in case inspiration hits, I need to write it down because I will forget it otherwise. So I've got the makings of about 2 minutes, 3 minutes of comedy there for my 5-minute set. But I've still got to think about it. I've got a big driving trip this week and I'll be doing a lot of thinking.
Let's play your next track because this is connected to the next part of the stand-up comedy story. You've just been to Melbourne, one of the world's great comedy festivals, the Melbourne Comedy Festival, and this song must have played some sort of role. Let's play it. You can come back and explain it. It's Elvis, Guitar Man. The King, Guitar Man, here on Soundtrack of Your Life on a Saturday afternoon. Radio Adelaide, 101.5 FM, digital radio and radioadelaide.org.au. I'm David Heath. Steve Davis is my first guest in the studio today for Soundtrack of Your Life. Guitar Man was written in 1967 by Jerry Reed, recorded by Elvis Presley soon after, with Reed playing lead guitar. It was re-recorded in 1980 with a new arrangement, but keeping Elvis's original vocal intact, and that new version hit number 28 on the US charts. Steve, that leads into you attending the very recent Melbourne Comedy Festival.
And the reason why that song is significant for me is, I grew up listening. I was given some Elvis albums by a neighbour and just loved his style. But that song always intrigued me, of this solo figure travelling the countryside with his wares being his art, some form of artistic expression, and going from place to place to try and eke out a living. And through happenstance, I stumbled over a live collection of Elvis tracks as I was driving to the airport before I flew to Melbourne for the International Comedy Festival. That track was on, and it just dawned on me that in a really tiny way, like a slither, nothing like Elvis, but in my own little way, this is my first step of travelling interstate armed with nothing other than some esoteric thoughts, some jokes, some stories, and I was going to go to a crowd where I knew nobody in a bar I'd never been before and perform on stage like a travelling minstrel, like Elvis's guitar man. Obviously not in that league, but it was just that taste of life on the road.
How was the experience of the whole Melbourne Comedy Festival?
Oh, it was fantastic. It was a night with 5 comedians. We're all alumni of the School of Hard Knock Knocks.
Yep.
And it was sold out. We're in a place called The Moat, if anyone knows Melbourne. It's one of those trendy bars, beautiful food, downstairs, basement area. And they had seating for 60 people. There were about 70 people crammed in there. So you can imagine the atmosphere was fantastic. And I opened for the night, and it was an absolute hoot to walk onto that stage. This is the thing about stand-up. And there's something I hate about the stand-up world, the language. They say, oh, you're going to kill it. You'll kill it. I actually hate that language. To me, apart from it being unnecessarily violent, it's not slaying people. It's not that. To me, the challenge is the curiosity that here is a being, an audience, and you have to get empathy from it, from them, strike trust, and then hopefully amuse them and surprise them. And to me, it's not a conquering. It's more the human connection. It's the challenge. It's curiosity. And so, I would like to see that language change eventually, because I hate it when they say, oh, you killed it out there.
Well, you're an insider now. Change it from the inside.
Yes.
Any thoughts about Edinburgh in the future?
Funny enough, this morning I was thinking it'd be nice to do something in Edinburgh. Our Fringe show isn't translatable, the one I did with Ralph, because it's very focused on Australia and especially South Australia. But next year I'd like to write something with Ralph, who's listening in, and I've told him not to call in today because we don't have time. I'd like to touch on something universal and give it a go, because you know that big fish in a small pond, then a tiny little thought of a fish in a huge ocean. That's Edinburgh. But it'd be a good challenge to see if you can eke out a little crowd.
Oh, that would be remarkable. The Edinburgh Festival. Steve, thank you. Thank you for giving me half an hour of your very valuable time on a Saturday afternoon here at Radio Adelaide. All the best with Talked About Marketing. If you're in the market for a marketer, Talked About Marketing, Steve Davis is your guy.
Yes, and 2 things. If after you hear Victoria, if you have a look online for Adelaide Show Podcast, you'll find her episode somewhere. But there's a quote from Oscar I'd like to finish with.
Certainly.
If you don't mind, because thank you for giving me a chance to talk about it. To thank all the people who came to my launch and gave up an Easter Monday, for crying out loud. And there's a beautiful quote that Oscar said, anybody can sympathise with the sufferings of a friend, but it requires a very fine nature to sympathise with a friend's success. And we're so easy to feel jealousy when someone's having a few things break their way, but it takes a really dignified human being to say well done and all the best when someone is starting to flap their wings. So I appreciated that with my friends that day.
Let's go out with your third and final selection for us today, and I think it's appropriate after the little piece of Oscar Wilde. This is Frank Sinatra, That's Life. That, of course, is the legendary Frank Sinatra with That's Life, written by Dean Kaye and Kelly Gordon, originally recorded by Marion Montgomery, the most famous version, of course, recorded by Frank Sinatra in 1966 and released on his album called That's Life. Peaked at number 4 on the US charts. This song's been covered by so many artists over the years, including Aretha Franklin, Shirley Bassey, James Brown, Van Morrison, David Lee Roth, Michael Bublé. The list goes on and on, and that was picked by my first guest on Soundtrack of Your Life this afternoon on Radio Adelaide, Steve Davis. It's time to introduce our second guest for the hour, and it is best-selling South Australian author Victoria Purman. Hello, Victoria.
Hi, David. No, I can't believe David Lee Roth covered that song.
Well, according to my information, there's plenty of them that have over the years, including David Lee Roth. You can just imagine his version, can't you?
Oh, all that flowing hair.
We won't play it today. You've got one thing up on me, and that is you've actually been a guest on my first guest today's Steve Davis podcast. I
have, yes. It was very entertaining. We had an interview with two of my writer colleagues around an open fire with red wine at a pub up in the hills. It was very nice.
How were you by the end of the podcast?
Well, I was fine. Can't speak for Steve.